In Adobe Illustrator, you can create reusable patterns that can be applied to artwork as a fill or as a stroke. Instead of manually creating a pattern each time you want to use it, you create it once and reuse it over and over again. Let's create a couple of patterns to get an idea of how they work. I'm beginning this video with the patterns.ai file already open on my computer. And I'm going to start by zooming in on this middle section of this mocked up web page. And what I want to do in this middle section is I want to create some angled lines as a pattern behind these icons. So I'm going to use the Pattern Maker feature in Illustrator, which was added in Illustrator CS6, and it was a stark improvement over previous versions of Illustrator. So to do this, I'm going to make sure I have nothing selected, and I'm going to go to the Object menu under Pattern and choose Make. And it's telling me that it's going to add this pattern over here in the Swatches panel. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And you can see that it takes you into pattern editing mode, kind of like isolation mode, if you will. And I'm going to zoom in on the pattern tile. You can see that the tile by default is 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And I can choose to tile my pattern by grid, brick by row or column, or hex by row or column. Now I'm going to give this pattern a name of stripes. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the rectangle tool. I'm going to set my stroke to none, and the fill, I'm going to use this light gray swatch that I have in my swatches panel. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag to draw a rectangle the size of my pattern tile. That's going to kind of be the background for my tile. And down here for the copies, it's showing me a 5 by 5 grid of this tile, although I can change that if I want to. And I can also dim the copies. So I'm going to leave that unchecked for now. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect that rectangle. I'm going to grab my line segment tool, change my fill to none, and my stroke, I'm just going to go into the color panel and set the RGB values to 230. There we go. And the reason why we're working in RGB is because I'm comping up a web page. And there's a good chance I'm going to reuse this to create artwork for the web, which would be in the RGB color mode. So I'm going to go ahead and use my line segment tool, and I'm going to click and drag from the top to the bottom to create a line that is all the way and it's perfectly vertical. So I held the Shift key as I drew, and it drew a line from top to bottom. I'm going to go ahead and go to the stroke panel. I'm going to change the width of this to 3.6. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this line. I'm just going to kind of slide this over, and we can see how wide that is. Now I'm just going to pull that over. I just want it to be right to the edge of my tile, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to transform this. So I'm going to go to my Object menu under Transform and choose Move. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this in the horizontal direction. We can turn the preview on. I'm going to move this 3.6 pt to the right. Now, I actually want to give it an equal space in between the lines. So I'm going to use a trick. I'm going to type 3.6 times 2. And that's going to give me the equal amount of space in between. So I'll just go ahead and hit copy. And then I'll press Command D on Mac or Control D on Windows multiple times until I have a repeating pattern all the way across. Now, you'll see here that my pattern tile is a little bit wider than the last object. And it depends on what you're trying to achieve. What I really need to do is expand this a little bit. So I'm going to grab my pattern tile tool, and I'm just going to open this up a little bit more. And you'll have to make some adjustments here because I'm going to have to grab the rectangle and open that up as well. But that looks pretty close. We may want to go in and just tweak that a little bit. And if I really wanted to be accurate, we could do this mathematically as well. But for this example, we're just going to make some minor adjustments, and that doesn't look too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and click Done. And now in my Swatches panel, you can see I have a new swatch that I can apply. Now if I click on this rectangle right here and apply that swatch, you'll have to be careful because I applied it to the stroke instead of the fill. So I'm going to apply None and make sure I apply that swatch to the fill. And now we can see we have that pattern that we created. Now I'm just going to zoom out a little bit because we can transform that pattern once we've created it. So any of my transform tools will allow me to do this. So I'm going to grab my rotate tool, and if I just click and drag to rotate, I'm going to rotate the object and not the pattern. So I'm going to undo that. And the trick to rotating the pattern is that you want to hold down the tilde key on your keyboard and then click and drag. And I'm going to add the shift key as I'm dragging to snap it to a 45-degree increment. And if I let go of my mouse, you can now see that I've rotated that pattern to the desired amount. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back to my selection tool, and I'm going to scroll down to this bottom portion. Now this one's going to be a little bit more complex because I want to use this artwork for my pattern. So I'm going to select this time, and I'm going to go to Object, Pattern, Make. And it's going to give me the same message. You can always choose to not show this again if you wish, but I'll go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to give this a name of Hatch. Now because I selected the artwork first, go ahead and zoom in on this, it's going to automatically create a tile out of the artwork that I had selected. You can see that the tile has automatically been made the same size as the art. Now that looks pretty good, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of changes because I'd like this to be a little bit more integrated rather than just a tiled pattern as you see here. So I'm going to change my tile type to grid, and I'm going to change it to brick by row. And you can see down here at the bottom a little bit changed. You can see that we're kind of offset now by a half, and you can change your brick offset if you wish. And that doesn't look too bad, but I want to go a step further. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my Pattern Tile tool, and I am going to zoom in a little bit more, slide this over here, and I'm going to grab the corner, and I'm going to pull this up because I want this to be right at the corner there. So right there is where my tile is ending. And if I zoom out, you can see that now I'm getting a little bit more of an integrated pattern. These are overlapping one another, and that's really what I was looking for. Now you could get a little bit more precise here. Probably what I wanted here, the height of the tile should have been 26.5, so I'll just type 26.5 there. And if I zoom in again, I just want to make sure that my tile is looking the way I want it to. I'm going to turn off the Pattern Tile tool, and that's looking pretty good. I think that's going to give me a nice tile. Now I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle the same size as my tile. So once I draw that, I'm going to go to the swatches panel, and I'm going to choose this darker swatch, and I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, and choose Send to Back. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because when you are doing an overlapping tile like this, you have to think of these as like shingles. And so you'll notice you have some overlap buttons down here that control how the tiles are going to overlap. And you may have to experiment with this because you can have it set so that the left part of the tile is in front, or the right part, or the top or the bottom. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my selection tool, and I'm going to pull my rectangle so that the top and left sides are right on the edge. And it gets a little bit tricky, you know, because if I try to get it perfect, I will often end up with a little bit of a seam that you might notice. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the bottom a little bit and the right side a little bit as well. Now you can see if you look at your pattern, I'm getting a little bit of an issue up here and over here. And that's where these overlaps come into play. So for my overlap, I'm going to click on the right button to tell the right side to be on top. And then over here, I'm going to click on this button to tell the bottom to be on top. And if you zoom out, you'll start to see right now the pattern is not quite looking the way that you want it to. So this is where you have to experiment a little bit. I'm going to click on the top in front, and now we can see that because the top is on front, I'm not getting any of the chopping off of the tile like I was before. You'll notice if I set the left in front, I'm getting a little bit of a cutoff at this point. But if I set the right to be in front, now my tile is looking pretty good. So you can experiment with these different options. What I may want to do is come up here, just make sure that my edge is where it needs to be, and zoom out to check this. And again, I'll probably want to make sure that the top is in front in this example. I think that's looking pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click the Done button. And if I zoom out, go ahead and zoom in this bottom section, I can click on this shape and apply this new pattern swatch that I created. And you can now see that I have a nice looking pattern swatch for the background of the footer of this web page. As you can see, patterns are quite powerful and flexible as well. It requires a little bit of math sometimes, but it will reap great rewards in the end.